Hello, I'm Stephen Alltop, Music Director and Conductor of the Champaign-Urbana Symphony Orchestra. It's my pleasure to share with you a few insights about our upcoming concert on Saturday, October 4th. This will be a very exciting program with 3 blockbuster works. Our concert begins with the Academic Festival Overture by Johannes Brahms. And this work dates from 1879, a year that saw the awarding of an honorary doctorate to Brahms, who was then 46 years old, by the University of Breslau. Brahms had previously been offered an honorary doctorate 6 years earlier by Cambridge University, but he abhorred the thought of sea travel and declined the offer. In the case of the Breslau doctorate, Brahms sent an appropriate thank you note for this great honor, but the university made it clear that they were hoping for a more musical acknowledgement of their gesture. So Brahms composed the Academic Festival Overture. What he did, though, may have been a little curious for some of the university officials, because he chose 4 very well-known popular songs, some of them drinking songs that would have been really familiar to college students of the time. So the piece opens in sort of a hushed manner, and the energy that's going to come is quite suppressed. Following a soft drum roll, 3 trumpets present the first of the traditional student songs called Wir hatten gebaut ein städtliches Haus, or We have built a stately house. Sounds like this. Here's what it sounds like with the 3 trumpets playing it. The melody Der Landesvater, or the Father of Our Country, appears in sweeping lyrical rendition introduced by the violins and the violas. Just beautiful as only Brahms could do. The tempo then shifts to an animato for the freshman song known as the Fox Ride. Brahms has the bassoons play this with an offbeat accompaniment of violas and cellos, and adds a touch of humor that probably raised a few faculty eyebrows or 2 at the premiere. The final tune Brahms incorporates into this Academic Festival Overture is Gaudiamus Igitur, or Therefore Let Us Be Merry, which sounds like this. He keeps his tongue firmly in cheek, though, by delivering this very noble hymn in a rousing and quite energetic version featuring the largest orchestra he ever wrote for. like to hear all the fireworks Brahms provides at the end of the piece, you're just going to have to come to the concert. The second piece on the program is Ravel's Piano Concerto in G major, featuring Timothy Aylin, faculty member at the University of Illinois. This piano concerto is not only one of the most exciting and beautiful in the genre, it's a perfect example of Ravel's orchestrational genius. The first movement opens with something called a slapstick or whip, and the music immediately bursts forth with incredible orchestral color, led by the piccolo. When the piano comes in, it's zipping glissandos up and down the keyboard with wild abandon, and then the solo trumpet takes over. The music quickly settles into a bit of a bluesy French cool jazz with brief interjections of the opening coloristic timbres. The first movement continues to alternate toccata-like driving passages with those that are very lush and introspective. I love this section where Ravel's color palette seems to just spill out all over the canvas. You hear an otherworldly stratospheric French horn solo, accompanied by various threads and etudes, figurations in the woodwinds. At one point, an oboist seems to be practicing octaves and just sort of wanders by. It's a great section. At one point, Ravel's brilliant imagination seems to make the piano sound like a musical saw. Just to remind you of what a musical saw sounds like, here's one playing some Chopin. That's something you don't hear every day. And here's the stream of trills that Ravel uses to make a similar effect. You've already heard the amazing colors that Ravel is able to draw from the piano and the orchestra. Following all the jazzy energy of the first movement, the second movement could not be more sublime. It is one of the most beautiful in the repertoire and might remind you a bit of a Chopin ballade with a simple left-hand accompaniment over which a sinuous long melody unfolds. There is a soulful and very long solo for the English horn, quite challenging too for breath support. The phrases of this movement are so long I cannot do it justice by playing you just a short excerpt. So again, come to the concert and enjoy this amazingly beautiful second movement. It will transport you to a very lovely place. The final movement is back to pure high-spirited fun. In 1932, Ravel conducted a recording of this concerto with Marguerite Long as soloist. Here's the opening of the third movement from this recording with its moto perpetuo piano part and outlandish and exotic punctuations from the solo winds and brass. You may notice that in this recording, the tempos are very fast. There is no doubt that in the very skilled hands of Timothy Aylin, this concerto, the Ravel Piano Concerto in G, will be a real treat to hear. Our concert concludes with the Symphonic Dances of Sergei Rachmaninoff, written in 1940 when he was 67 years old. This was Rachmaninoff's only major work to be wholly written in the United States. At this point, Rachmaninoff still performed widely as a concert pianist, including numerous recitals right here in Illinois. It is interesting to know that on December 10th of 1940, the year he completed this work, Rachmaninoff conducted his oratorio The Bells at the Orchestra Hall in Chicago, featuring the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and the Apollo Chorus of Chicago. And of course, it's my privilege to be the 9th music director of the Apollo Chorus in its 154-year history, and we love that connection in our history to Rachmaninoff. In the late 1930s, Rachmaninoff had become discouraged by the tepid reaction his new works were receiving. The Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini was and is still today a total hit, but other pieces like his Fourth Piano Concerto, Variations on the Theme of Corelli, had not met with acclaim. His Third Symphony received a moderately warm response. He was a giant of the Romantic age, living in the time of Stravinsky, Copland, and Schoenberg. And he was weary of being viewed as a musical dinosaur and old-fashioned. Between 1936 and 1940, he virtually stopped composing. As war loomed, Rachmaninoff left Europe for good in 1939 and went to live on an estate in New York not far from Vladimir Horowitz. I'm guessing that for a time, whatever zip code that was, boasted the best pianists per capita of any in the United States. His spirits revived, Rachmaninoff practiced for hours a day, and his urge to compose could no longer be ignored. Rachmaninoff had long called the Philadelphia Orchestra one of the greatest in the world. He held it in very high esteem. In an interview in 1931, he said, "Unquestionably, they are the finest orchestral combination in the world." It was with the Philadelphia Orchestra that many of Rachmaninoff's compositions were premiered, and he had close relationships with both Leopold Stokowski and Eugene Ormandy. In August of 1940, he wrote to Eugene Ormandy that he was about to complete an orchestral work, a new one called Fantastic Dances, and he wondered if the Philadelphia Orchestra would like to do the premiere. Rachmaninoff had thought of calling the three movements Noon, Evening, and Midnight. As he orchestrated the pieces, though, he changed his mind from Fantastic Dances to Symphonic Dances. He had even toyed with the idea of just calling the work simply Dances, but he worried that people might associate it with the dance bands that were so wildly popular in the 1930s and 40s. We normally apply the word symphonic not only to full orchestral forces, which this piece definitely employs, but to works that develop motives and themes like the great symphonies, say, of Beethoven, Brahms, or Sibelius. Over a repeated note pulsation that in itself is a very important building block of the symphony, the first melodic motive we hear features descending thirds, played by the English horn, first clarinet, first bassoon. And these are also extremely important motives for the entire piece. So we hear the violins start with the repeated notes, then the English horn, then the first clarinet, then the bassoon. All the while the strings are doing this repeated motive. After what seems like a momentary testing of the waters, the full strength of the symphony orchestra comes to bear in brusque chords, and now over pounding repeated notes, we hear the melodic motives passed around and developed between the winds and the brass of the orchestra. After one more climax of the opening material, the ardor of the music cools down a bit into a lyrical section. The elements of the repeated notes remain present, and the solo oboe and solo clarinet have a conversation adapted from the thirds of that opening melodic phrase. This is the oboe. From amidst this tranquil tapestry of intertwining woodwinds, a new voice emerges. If you're keeping a running list of symphonic works that use the saxophone, add this one. It's one of the most famous solos. Lasting over 2 minutes, this saxophone solo reminds one a bit of the long and lovely clarinet solo in Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. Eventually the piano enters, taking up those undulating thirds that we heard the oboe and clarinet playing, and the strings take up the saxophone's tune. And we find ourselves immersed in the sound world of Rachmaninoff that we love. The Symphonic Dances was a highly reminiscent work for Rachmaninoff, filled with reflections on his own life and loves, and the Russia he had once known, lost to him since the 1917 revolution. The end of the violin's phrase you're about to hear, with the supporting sound of the piano underneath, seems to be a direct quote from his sublime vocalise. Something very important and poignant happens just before the end of the first movement. A new melody is heard with a shimmering, almost magical accompaniment with glockenspiel, harp, and piano. The story behind this moment is amazing and very moving, but if you want to hear it, you'll have to come to the concert when I will say more about it. The second movement is in 6/8 time and sounds like a sad, somewhat macabre waltz, reminiscent of Ravel's La Valse. After a couple more buzzy brass interjections, the concertmaster starts a rhapsodic solo that ends with a clear invocation of the first movement's main motives. A brief return of the muted brass leads to a new section of filled-in thirds, again relating to the work's opening motive. It is also important to note that the stereotypical offbeat accompaniments of the waltz is a motivic development of the opening two notes of the beginning. We heard at the beginning, ba 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 ba, which in the waltz is ba 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 ba. It is all cut from the same cloth. In the third and final movement, Rachmaninoff expresses particular longing for the Russian church music he loved so deeply, and the plain chants associated with Russian Orthodoxy in his youth. Once the music gets going, it has a decidedly Spanish brilliance to it. The prevailing motive is derived from the Dies Irae plain chant, a rhyming sequential chant from the 13th century. Most of you have heard it before. Dies Irae, dies illa, sovet seclum in favilla. This, of course, was a favorite of Rachmaninoff's, first appearing in a student work in 1891, and subsequently he used it in 14 of his later works. A third of his output contained the Dies Irae. This is one reason Rachmaninoff seems to have had a rather foreboding and dark presence to many people. Stravinsky called him a 6.5-foot scowl. But you know, you can go on YouTube and see home movies that show what a kind and loving man he was. The music builds to a fantastic climax before changing into the middle slow section of the final movement, which lasts almost 6 minutes and is filled with gorgeous music that we tend to expect from Rachmaninoff. After the lento, a sprightly oboe takes us back into the more tarantella, quicksilver-like material of the opening. We hear the full brilliance and Rachmaninoff's sense of color with more strands of the Dies Irae. We then hear a phrase of plain chant, "We thank you, God," that is taken from his amazing piece for a cappella chorus called the Solemn Vespers, or All-Night Vespers, and this appears in the lower strings. In his manuscript, above the climax, Rachmaninoff wrote the word Alleluia. And I'm hoping that when you come on October 4th, you'll leave saying the same thing. Thanks for watching and see you soon.